added to the council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join the link on the website or on a mobile or tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. Just like you to note that recently, following the by-election in Minster, the membership of the committee has changed slightly. Councillor Karen Watson has joined the committee, and Councillor Mark Tucker is no longer with the committee. And also Councillor Peter MacDonald is also now on this committee following the election. But I'd like to thank Councillor Tucker, I'd like Mark, for his contribution that he's made during his time with this committee, and his help and his assistance going forward was much appreciated. I'd like to welcome everyone to the community committee meeting, including visiting members who are attending remotely and members of the public. The following staff are in attendance in the council chamber or remotely. I don't think we've got any staff remotely, but in the council chamber, sitting on my left, is the head of the Environment and Leisure, Martin Cassell, the Leisure and Technical Services Manager, Jay Jenkins, on the far left, and the Policy and Engagement Officer, Janet Dart, sitting in the centre between Martin and Jay. And we're assisted tonight by Democratic Service Officer Kelly McKenzie. I'd like to advise that there is no fire alarm planned for tonight. So if the alarm does go off, we will leave the building by the nearest exit. As there's no members of the public here, I don't think we need to go through the full itinerary of the fire procedure, as we all should know it fairly well, or very well. And does anyone in the chamber at the moment, would they need assistance? Should there be a live evacuation needed? If I could ask Kelly if we could have any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Tara No, and Councillor Elliot Jays is attending remotely. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you for that. So if we move on. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you for that, and we can make notes of that. Thank you. That's item 2 out of the way. If we can move on to item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the Wednesday, 6th of September 2023. Has anyone got any comments or issues they'd like to bring up with this, or would you like to highlight, or would someone like to recommend these as being a true record of the events that took part that evening? Is that recommending? Okay, and Lee, Shelley, Councillor Cheeseman behind you. So it's Councillor Nundin proposing the minutes, Councillor Cheeseman seconding. Is everyone quite happy that these are a reflection of that meeting? Yeah. Okay. Item 4, declarations of interest. Councillors should not act or take decisions in order to gain financial or other material benefits for themselves or their family or friends. So I'm going to ask members if you have any disclosure pecuniary interests or disclosable non-pecuniary interests. And if you do, could you make us aware now so that we can make a record of it? So does anyone have any disclosable pecuniary interests on this matter, on any matters on the agenda tonight?
A non-pecuniary interest because I'm a member of the Country Park Committee. So I will just mention that. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I'm trying to. Councillor Martin, no?
Yes, it's,
Yep,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, it's a non-pecuniary interest. I represent Swale Borough Council on the Faversham Pools.
Okay, thank you for that. Just before we move on to all the items tonight, just remind you that the reefs are in the members' lounge. So if you're going to Royal Reef on behalf of the Mayor on Remembrance Sunday, now's your opportunity to collect it, but don't forget to sign that you've collected it. So tonight, all the items on the agenda are Part B reports for the Community Committee to decide. Item number 5 is the playing pitch strategy, and I'd like to ask the officer to introduce the report. So I'll hand over now to Jay Jenkins to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. The first report this evening is the playing pitch strategy. The report in front is to discuss the content and to agree the draft recommendations that are attached to Appendix 1 and 2. We're looking for the committee approval for the period that runs alongside the local plan. The strategy has been undertaken by, we've been working with independent consultants, a company called Strategic Leisure, and they've used a number of Sport England guided tools to set the direction and determine the priorities for the future provision. The strategy identifies the current supply and any future demand for playing pitches within the borough. The strategy follows Sport England guidance, as I've mentioned earlier, and that is supported by the national governing bodies for all the sports. The document recognises there's a balance between setting priorities and balancing the financial position of each of the public sectors. And as I said, the governing bodies, in addition to the governing bodies, sorry, the schools, local clubs and private facility operators have also been engaged with where available. The findings are based on a technical assessment, and that's using baseline data, and recommendations are informed by the findings. This includes physical visits to site, consultations with site owners and user groups. The current Swale playing pitch strategy expires this year, hence this exercise we're undertaking, and the new strategy will cover the period that runs alongside the local plan. Following the review of the final documents, this will inform the borough's local plan process, support the local plan process, and that will ensure that appropriate contributions are identified and ultimately made by developers for future provision. It's also important to note the tough budgetary positions that we're in at the moment, and I think the document therefore regularly refers to the need to look at options for investment and balancing out Swales Borough Council expenditure and internal income from grants and developer contributions. The recommendations set out which sites and sports are priority and provide guidance of how improvements could be made and where potentially resources, as and when resources become available. The proposal, therefore, is to discuss the content of the report, agree that the draft recommendations which are attached are sent forward to review, which is by the key stakeholders, which is at the next process along the Sport England journey. Alternative options, failure to adopt the PPS could severely limit the ability to gain developer contributions going forward. And as I mentioned earlier on the consultation, the targeted consultants have engaged with a range of key stakeholders and interested parties. There are a number of implications which we've listed out there. I think they do tie into the cost base, as I mentioned earlier. Also, there would need to be consideration for the grounds maintenance contract running alongside being able to deliver the pitches in the appropriate standard. And without the strategy, as I mentioned earlier, the Sport England accreditation would obviously put the local plan in jeopardy for future funding. There are two appendices attached. The first one is a list of recommendations for three of the key four, the main four sports, the big four as they're referred to, and there are a number of recommendations for each sport: rugby, cricket, and hockey. At the time of report, we hadn't received the football report at that stage. That did come in back end of last week, but we hadn't reviewed in time for tonight. But that has with us now, and the next stage will be will pick up the other 3 sports, which is tennis, indoor bowls and netball, and they're done on a slightly different format and tend to form as part of stage 2. So I'll pause there if there's any questions.
Okay, so I'll call out people who want to make an input and questions, but we have a member who's online, Councillor Dolly Worcester. So if you'd like to ask your question first. Don't know if you can hear me, Councillor Worcester, but your microphone appears to still be turned off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? Can anybody hear me?
You're coming in loud and clear.
Sorry, my signal in Wade is awful for trick or treat, and I do apologise. And excuse this question if I haven't read the report properly. Can I just confirm that my residents would really like to be reassured that when we're looking at these sort of reports, that all abilities and disabilities are looked at within these sorts of reports, so that for the borough, our future plans do include all levels of ability that allow them to access. I know we're not in control of the clubs that use these areas, but from our point of view, we are looking at that element of it as well, are we?
Yes is the answer. The Sport England recommendations and template that's being used identifies a range of all accessibility for all sport. What will happen is that as part of the final draft or final paper, there will be identification of where potentially needs are. So therefore there may be activities that aren't currently available, either in certain sports or at certain facilities, and that will be identified as part of the report.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Councillor Last, followed by Councillor Perkin.
Thank you, Chair. My question really is, in the report it says football to follow, and you have had the paperwork related to football. Will that come to this committee? Because this report, if it's saying it should include football, I don't know if I can actually approve this without seeing the football aspect.
Yes is the answer. The football has arrived. The recommendations are for the 3 sports we've received thus far. So tonight we're asking you to approve those 3 with football to follow. And yes, football's recommendations, and I'm sure there will be some, will follow on.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Councillor, because clearly we would prefer to bring everything all in one go. The reason we took the decision not to pull the report on the basis of not having that information, and the reason being is because the process the consultants go through, even before we get presented to Sport England, they've been having conversations with the national governing bodies, and a number of those were delayed over the summer. So they've then had that feedback from the national governing body and interpreted it and got that information to us. The reason we bought it in part was because we want to get cracking as much as possible. So if the committee agree the recommendations for the 3 sports this afternoon, we can get that process started with Sport England. But absolutely, we wouldn't look to send the football recommendations without coming back to the committee.
so hopefully the football recommendation should be with us by January's meeting, and it won't disadvantage if they go at a separate time. It won't put football at a disadvantage. It's just they were going. The report is different, yeah.
No, what we need to do is have a think about the timelines around that. So the ideal would have been to have bought everything back in January. What we'll do is when we speak to Sport England on these 3, we'll work out a timeline with them, and if that means we need to have an emergency meeting to bring the football recommendations through, whether that be virtually or in person. You know, I can take some advice from you guys and from the monitoring officer on that. But ideally, we would then come back with the overall strategy, having been gone through the Sport England process for final adoption stroke consultation.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is Councillor Perkin, followed by Councillor Nundy, and then Councillor Moore. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to follow on from Councillor Worcester's point, really, is there a facility within the Sport England application, the process that you go through with Sport England, to look proactively at encouraging people with disabilities into sport? So is there a kind of thing that we can be really ambitious about in terms of not just looking at how we can make sure that applications are applicable and usable for people with disabilities, but look at a way that we can be really really ambitious and kind of forward looking in terms of provision? And then I'm glad, my second question was around netball, so I'm glad to hear that there's going to be some netball discussion coming forward, because it's very sad that Swale lost its only netball league a couple of years ago, and that hasn't come back yet. So people playing netball are now playing in kind of Maidstone and Canterbury, and it's a shame that there's no league in Swale anymore. So anything that we can do to encourage that, I think, would be really positive.
Do you want to come back on that, Jane?
Yes, thank you. I'll take the latter one first. Yes, that will follow, and the key four main four, as they call them, tend to get done first, because that's the front end of the process. So the other three will follow on quite quickly afterwards. The first point is a valid one, and I think I mentioned in the report that there's a current supply and then the demand, and I think it will be an identification of where we're currently at in a sense of our provision, and then a projection of where we will need to be to pick up particularly the population growth and so on. And I think that's the time to link in with Sport England around what that modelling looks like and what the activity delivery looks like to cover all accessibility issues.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's absolutely right to have that aspiration to improve. And this is very much about the supply and demand rather than the physicality of the sites. Clearly, as a local authority, I would assume that we want to provide facilities that are as accessible as possible. I hope that's an agreed assumption rather than me needing to state that. So are every one of our facilities at the best level of that? Absolutely not. Can we use contributions from developers? Can we apply for funding to try and make them better? Absolutely. Prime example being Faversham Recreation Ground. When we improved the pavilion there, you design all of those issues. A lot of our pavilions and sports pitches were designed in 1960 when a lot of the standards didn't exist. So each time we upgrade a facility, we're obviously moving it to today's standards as opposed to previously. So in terms of the activities, the national governing bodies are key to feed into this. They know what their sport is doing for disability access and others, whether that be adaptations to activities, and they will work through the clubs that register with them to be able to provide that activities. What we really need to ensure through this strategy is that we encourage facilities, whether it's us providing them or other sectors providing them, that enable those clubs to undertake those activities that the national governing body guide them on.
Okay, Councillor Nundy, and I think the last speaker will be Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a look through, and on the three that we've got, rugby union, cricket and hockey, there's nothing about development on the island. So I wasn't sure if that's because the facilities on the island are absolutely fantastic and don't require any improvement, or if it's because, once again, Sheppey's a second thought.
I think what the recommendations do is pull out the highlights from their initial audit. I think within the wider document suite, there is specific reference, for example, to Sheppey Rugby Club as an example, and 3G pitches within the educational establishments on the island. So that yes, there is considerations of course, and I think any review could identify if an area has been overlooked or missed, and that's the whole point of having a review process. But yes, there are specific recommendations to Sheppey locations within the wider report.
And just to add to that, again, the recommendations have come from conversations with the national governing bodies, so they know where their clubs and membership and participation levels are. I think when you see football come forward, you will definitely see Sheppey recommendations. And as you say, you know, Sheppey Rugby Club quite well set. The cricket clubs, none of which are, you know, the cricket facilities, none of which are in Swale Borough Council's ownership. We don't provide cricket wickets anymore, but there's a good supply. I'm a cricketer, so I've played a fair few times on the island, and they're certainly nicer than the facilities I play on at my local club. So, you know, I think they are well provisioned. That doesn't mean that they're being ignored. Absolutely, but yeah.
Okay. Councillor Moore, and I didn't notice that Councillor Worcester had a hand up, even so as he's spoken. I will allow to come back and have the last word. So, Councillor Moore.
Yeah, it was very similar. I noticed reading through the document, there was nothing on the island, and especially the eastern end of the island where I represent, there is very little facilities for anyone. And also, you know, going on from disabilities as well, women's sports, women's football, women's rugby is picking up as well. So we need to obviously include that as well.
Thank you. Again, in the wider text, particularly around the travel challenges from the east of the island is identified, and it does make reference to both Sittingbourne and Sheppey Rugby Club, and indeed Faversham Rugby Club having a ladies section, and so Faversham's has recently, last couple of seasons has got off the ground, and Sittingbourne has just started a ladies side. So there is specific reference to that in the wider documents.
Okay, the last speaker is going to be Councillor Worcester, and then we'll move on to the vote if that's all right. Just quickly come back on that, yeah? Councillor Worcester.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to have two goes at this. I know standing order say just one. I apologise, but I will just say that I hope the document that's coming forward for football will also recognise that the island secondary school, whereas sporting facilities could have serviced the whole of the secondary age group at the school, will now be only offered on a daily basis to the academy that runs that site. So there will be a change there. I hope the football document will reflect that. And I also hope councillors, when that comes back, that secondary report, will take a close look at New Road playing field, because their changing rooms are definitely not disability friendly, and they are definitely almost at the end of their lifetime. So I'm hoping that is two elements that you will consider when the football element comes back to you in future. Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
I lost you a little bit there on the New Road, but I think I got the gist. I don't know if that is referred to specifically, because that would be in the wider documents, which we get the initial recommendations and then the drafts come. But the school usage, I suspect, will be considered, because it does consider predominantly about lack of community usage at educational centres that have sporting facilities. So that and you'll see a thread later in the BFS report around opening up access to educational centres for sporting community use.
And Martin, you want to come back on that as well, yeah?
Yeah, Councillor Worcester, a really, really good point. what these recommendations are around sort of more generalised recommendations rather than specifically saying everything about every facility, but New Road I would absolutely agree with you on. What I would also say is that this report and everything was published pre the embargoed information around the changes to education on the two schools on the island. So I am suitably encouraged already by some early conversations with those operators around access to school sports and facility sites. So I think that's one that we can follow up, but clearly wasn't a consideration at the point that the consultants met with, because the consultants wrote out to all of the schools and basically said, what is it that you're looking to provide? What have you got? What are you looking to provide? And clearly that was before the recent announcement. So we'll look to pick up on that as the strategy progresses.
Okay, just before we move
Thank
to the
you.
vote, I noticed Peter's, oh, sorry. I noticed Councillor McDonald's been waving his hand. If you've got a very quick question, then I think we should move to the vote and move on, yeah?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a very quick comment, actually, that I understand that beyond Laysdown on the old bombing range, the football pitch there is actually owned by Swell Council.
Well, mate, I was going to say maybe you can find out and come back with the answer.
Yeah, if you're referring to the one at Shellness, yeah, it's Swale ownership, but leased to the sports club there.
Well, look, now I think we should move to the vote, and I think we need someone to propose it, the recommendation as it's laid out in the agenda, which I'll find in a minute and read out. So, I mean, it says the recommendation is members to discuss, which we've done that very well, the content of the report and agree the draft recommendations at Appendix 1 and 2, and that they be, that's the recommendation. So I'm looking for someone to propose that. Councillor Winkless. And seconded by Councillor MacDonald. So all those in favour of the recommendation as stated in the report? That's unanimous, yeah? Thank you for that, members. So that was a unanimous vote. So we can move on to item 6, the built facility strategy. And if I could ask Jay again to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you. A similar theme. This is the built facility strategy, and again we're looking for members to discuss the content of the report and agree the list of draft recommendations that are at Appendix 1. Excuse me. The strategy provides an assessment of the current supply of built sports provision in terms of quality, quantity, accessibility, location and management. So again, a criteria that's followed under the Sport England model. We've used the same consultants. It was a sort of hand-in-hand project with the PPS because they do work alongside each other. Like the PPS, the current Swale BFS expires this year, and we've received an initial overview of the report and some draft recommendations, and we have sent back a number of versions with some comments that, and we're still waiting that final version. The strategy provides evidence base that will allow Swale to plan for the future and obviously links in, like the PPS, to the local plan process. It follows the Sport England guidance and is supported by national governing bodies of sports. It's important to stress that the study focuses on facility provision in the context of health and well-being. Facility investment priorities will reflect locally, needs to be deliver opportunities for local community to be more active, which is one of the key targets of Sport England. The recent quality audits and assessments have identified a number of key provisions, and we've listed there the key ones. Sports halls currently has an oversupply, but there are 14 sport halls unavailable for community use currently. So going back to my comment earlier on around opening up accessibility for the community is a key action for us going forward. If we manage to open up a few of those, then obviously there will be more than enough provision going forward. Aquatics, so swimming pools, the current level is just about where we need it to be. However, we do need to, particularly at Sheppey, extend the current 6-lane provision to ideally 8, and that's done on a calculation of usage demand. Health and fitness, this is predominantly around the health and fitness market, so the gyms and the dance group exercise studios and so on. There is a projected requirement for a small increase of 21 stations, and that could be done in a number of different ways, whether that be the private or public sector, but there is a feel the projection would require that additional capacity. Squash, indoor bowls and gymnastics, again, I've listed there a number of things that we could be looking at going forward. Community centres, we spoke earlier about opening up access, and again, we could be using those for informal sports and physical activity. General provision is ideally looking at, through the housing growth, is trying to link in existing and new communities with enhanced walking, enhanced cycling, and enhanced jogging routes as part of the design and consideration at planning stage. The projected water space by 2038 is a need for the additional 2 lanes, as we've talked about, and there will be some need for some capital investment in Swale to facilitate the current assets, but also to deliver the demand for the future. In specific, excuse me, in specific reference to that, it's the refurbishment of Swallows, the Sheppey pool, sports hall provision at Sheppey will be refurbished as part of the Levelling Up funding project, and Faversham pools investment will also be required in some of the voluntary sector and education facilities within Faversham. The 3 key needs that came out of the supply and demand analysis are listed at 2.9. Redevelop the existing water provision at Sheppey from 6 to 8, retain the existing levels of community accessibility, sports halls, swimming pools and fitness stations on a pay and play basis, and consider how best to facilitate the enhanced and dedicated gymnastics facilities and explore a feasibility of increasing an indoor bowls provision. So they're the key 3 needs that have come out at this stage. Retaining and improving the provision is crucial to Swale. Active lice source, which is in November 21-22, did highlight that 28% of Swale's community is not active enough to have a health benefit, which is a key metric for us when we're looking at planning for the future and what the actual offerings are. It is important, as with the PPS, that Sport England sign off the document because it forms part of the local plan, and obviously will be a key discussion point within the planning application process. So the alternative is not to adopt one. That will severely limit our ability to gain contribution development, as with the PPS. So the recommendation is that a BFS is adopted. A number of implications are listed, and at Appendix 1 you have a summary of the recommendations that have come out of the BFS at this stage, and there are 22 of those. I've also put there the Sport England definitions of protect, enhance and provide, because they're the key areas that are focused on by the audit, but also Sport England's criteria. So I thought it would be helpful to have an explanation of what each of those are. I'll pause there and take any questions.
Chair, thank you. Apologies if I can just say, so this is very much similar. What we're looking for tonight is a discussion on the items so that we can go off to Sport England and say, look, this is what we think locally. What do you think? And then we will come back with a final version of the built facilities strategy for adoption in the future. So it's very much about, are we going in the right direction? Can we go to the next stage of talking to the stakeholders? We've got one that's a representative tonight, but we need to be talking with the trusts. We need to be talking with the other providers of the facilities to make sure that we're getting the right information. And what this document will ultimately end up doing is setting a strategic direction that then Jay and myself can go off and look to try and lever in some of that external investment to be able to improve the facilities. The summary from the consultants, having done all the audits, is you've got about enough vision, but it's aged. You know, a lot of it is 20, 30 years old, and therefore that's a risk. So we recognise that we need that investment with the council's budgetary challenges at the moment. We need to be able to lever in as much as we can externally, and that's the aim of this strategy.
Okay, thank you very much for the report or for the introduction to it. I will throw it open for questions, and I've seen Councillor MacDonald followed by Councillor Nundy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, it's the swimming pool at Sheerness. There used to be the Aquarina, which was built in about 1930, which was an open air, full-size pool, was actually built by Sheerness Urban District Council, which is underneath it. I don't know whether people, and I'm not blaming anybody, I don't know whether people didn't get their calculations right when they built the small, what I call the duck pond, on top, because it's on posts and beams, and apparently it's already cost Swale an awful lot of money because of leaks. When I was young, a gallon of water weighed £10, and if you put a whole load of gallons on small posts, it doesn't work. So frankly, my own view is that the whole thing needs to be demolished, and we need to start from scratch with a full-size swimming pool up to competition standards. We have also, again, on Sheppey, we've got an extremely poor economic base. And my own view is that with tourism and with possibility of running big competitions, if you have that facility, that will really help with some of the economic problems that Sheppey has got. And the site is, in my view, is absolutely ideal. It must have had a huge weight with the old Aquarina swimming pool, so the ground will have been well and truly consolidated. So frankly, as a, you know, in my experience of construction, I would rip the whole thing down and actually use the underside to bring it up to a full standard. And I think there should be funding from the Sport England or from the government to actually do that. And obviously we'll put a huge amount of pressure on them to force the issue. But it's something that absolutely desperately needs to be done. If you spend money on it as it is, you'll just be throwing good money after bad. Thanks very much. And I don't blame anybody, sorry. Thank you.
Some well-made points there. Does anyone want to come back?
Having stood underneath the pool tank, I think I might concur with some of Councillor MacDonald's comments there. I think it is at end of life, and it's slightly going ahead of what this is. This is recognising that Sheppey Pool needs a decision. Future decisions on whether it's a competition standard pool and others would be all through a feasibility project and funding bid, as you say, that would need external investment as well. What I can say is officers are absolutely having those conversations. So we've got condition surveys, we're lining up all of those ducks so that we are ready at the relevant point.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. Next to the speaker is Councillor Nundy, followed by Councillor Perkins, and then Councillor Winkles.
Thank you, Chair. I don't need to make a point. Councillor MacDonald made it more than adequately. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. Does the built facilities strategy not heavily pin on the next agenda item in terms of, you know, the direction that goes in is going to massively impact the built facilities strategy? So is it right to discuss putting this strategy together in advance and agreeing the recommendations in advance of making a decision on agenda point 7?
Yeah, I'll take that one because that's not a technical question. That is a governance question. Yes, absolutely. I should have probably reversed the agenda item. So I'm happy the chair would like to take the other report as well before we come back on. What I would say to that, Councillor Perkin, is again, this is not about saying these are the final strategy points. It is about saying these are the points that we would like to put to Sport England. Check that they're of that understanding. Clearly, the leisure options work over the next 3 to 4 months will impact the decisions that you have, and so we're not looking for a strategy approval tonight. We're looking for an agreement in principles on the recommendations to be able to take it forward to the next stage. So that's the only thing I would say, but possibly I could have got my agenda items a little bit better tonight. Apologies.
I think that was a very good question. I think we will just carry on with agenda item 6. I think we can decide and just make the recommendations, but of course, agenda item 7, we can then agree that and move forward. I think that makes a logical sense. Councillor Perkin.
Thanks. In that case, I have a question on agenda point 6, but it's the same point really that I made about the previous agenda point, in that I'd like to see us being ambitious about provision for people with disabilities. Just I think it's good to show ambition around that. Like, just as an example, in the equality and diversity section, it doesn't mention any impacts, and I think actually there is a number of things that we could really outline that we're trying to do. I know there's a lot of good work by the officers to look into the accessibility of our assets, and I think we should be making very clear that that work is happening, and also that we're ambitious around what we want to do as a council.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, very valid point. As with the previous item, we will have the opportunity with any new facility, if and when we get to that position, to obviously design in any current requirements. That said, we have been fortunate to secure some funding earlier part of the year for what are called Changing Places facility. Please, I'm going to see Swallows tomorrow, which should be nearly finished, and they're starting on the Isle of Sheppey in the swimming centre, hopefully in the next few weeks. So that will be full accessibility changing facility for a range of requirements, and will be covered by MD UK and supported, and part of the wider Changing Places provision in the country, where you can go onto an app and it will tell you where your local provision is. So there is opportunity to retrofit some of these items in the current buildings, but it is challenging in some because of their design and so on. But ultimately, we have been fortunate on these 2 occasions to be able to put those 2 units in.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Winkles.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very good report, and I'm all in favour of Sports England or external funding coming from Sports England to basically fund the Swallows. The Swallows basically is very much dated and certainly needs some expenditure put on it. I think some of us can remember when the roof blew off a few years ago. So I am totally in favour of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winkles. Councillor Moore.
Just again, a similar point as before. Obviously the Sheppey Pool and everything does need refurbishing, but it also needs to be thought about of access for people on the eastern end of the island, because the transport links are not great and a lot of people can't even get there. So just to reiterate that point.
Yeah, Councillor Moore, absolutely valid. Whilst I can't pick the facility up and put it in Laysdown, what we can do, and this links to the next point, and that's why we've tried to bring all three reports on the same meeting, because there's lots of interconnectivity between them. What we can do, if we decide that having a leisure provision is the right decision moving forward, because I'm not predetermining anything, then what we can do is design that service to not only be based in the facilities that we have, but to include some outreach as well. And so I think that is particularly pertinent on the island. But certainly if you're looking to get that 28% of inactives in our borough, and this is not people that do a bit of activity, this is people that do absolutely no activity and therefore no health benefit. In order to encourage those individuals, having the leisure centres is not good enough. You need that extra bit to be able to bridge that gap between somebody stepping foot in a leisure centre or somebody never going in there. And so we've had a lot of discussions in the leisure working group and as officers around how we try and design a service that caters for the current market that are using our centres, but also the additional market, somewhere near 70% that aren't using the facilities.
Okay, well, thank you for that all. Very interesting questions. And thank you for your input. We're now going to move on to the vote. So I'd need someone to propose and second the recommendation. Councillor Winkler proposing, Councillor McDonald seconding. So recommendation is that members to discuss, which we've done, the content of the report and agree the draft recommendations in Appendix 1. All in favour of that recommendation? That looks unanimous again. So thank you for that. And we can move on now to agenda item 7, which is the Leisure Options Working Group. And again, I'll ask the Officer J to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Leisure Options Working Group, a couple of recommendations this evening for you. One is that you note the contents of the report and also hopefully agree the Leisure Options Working Group terms of reference, which are attached to Appendix 1. The report is to update the committee as to what the future leisure options are undertaken, agree the draft terms, and hopefully allow the working group to proceed. The background, I'll pluck out the main headings there. The current leisure contract, which is Swallows and Sheppey, runs through to the 31st of March 25. Faversham Pools currently has a long-term lease and doesn't sit within the leisure contract with the other two sites. The initial 15-year contract was due to end in September 2019 and was then extended by 5.5 years to bring it in line with the contract years, our financial year, sorry. Obviously, the pandemic has had a fairly large impact, not only locally, but nationally within the leisure market. And that has now created the time for us to start looking at what the options going forward are. As we've already just covered, we've working with Consultant Strategic Leisure on the built facility strategy because they are inadvertently linked, as mentioned earlier. So the decision is required of which option should be worked up by officers. The aim of the working group is to consider the benefits and disadvantages of the range of options that can be brought to the community committee in the future into next year for a final decision. Excuse me, the group will need to look at the options from, unfortunately, the least palatable, which is to actually cease providing a leisure service, right up to a large future leisure provision and everything in between, really. They'll also need to decide which operating model would need to be considered. There are a number, and ultimately trying to ensure that it brings the best service for the best value for money, and also ties in with, as I mentioned earlier, the financial challenges of the midterm financial strategy. There are a number of strategic outcomes that need to be considered, and these will respond to recent and Sport England recent policy changes. So members are asked to review the report and obviously look at the terms and reference and agree those for the group to go forward. To not continue with the leisure service is an option, but it's not recommended, as this is a key service for the community, and the health and well-being commitment locally will be adversely affected if the centres are closed. I mentioned earlier that we've started some consultations. We have spoken to Swell Community Leisure, Circular Leisure, and Faversham's Leisure Trust, and our consultant Strategic Leisure have also undertaken some soft market testing with the main leisure operators nationally to gauge their view on whether they feel Swale could be an opportunity in the future for them. List of implications, I'll draw you to the second section there with the current cost of the leisure provision. It's fair to say that covers all three facilities because of the grant payment that is made to Faversham Pools, just for clarity. And the appendix which is attached is the draft terms of reference, and you'll notice there are some key groups that are considered, the makeup of the group itself, the councillor membership across all parties, clarification of what the purpose of the group is, aims of the group, identification of roles and responsibility, and a standing agenda item format, which obviously can be flexed depending on the topic of the group. I'll dare and take any questions.
Thanks for that. So I'll open it up to questions, but I do think, as the report clearly says, it is about moving forward with the working group. It's cross-party, and there's going to be, or has to be, good engagement with all members to make sure that we get something suitable for the borough going forward. And I agree with Jay. It would be very remiss if we didn't have any leisure facilities here. And if you've watched the news recently, Woking Borough Council, they've issued a 114 notice, effectively bankruptcy. And one of the things that their auditors or the commissioners sent in are looking at taking away their leisure facilities. But we've been quite prudent here, and hopefully we can look at providing some excellent facilities throughout the borough. So I'd like to open it up to questions, if anyone. Councillor Perkins.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it just strikes me that the 31st of March 2025 is going to come around pretty quickly. Like, that's not very far away. So if we are going to fundamentally change the way that leisure is provided in the borough, we're going to have to come up with some pretty quick and innovative ways of doing that. I was wondering how closely partners are being consulted around the decision-making processes for the working group. I think it would be super helpful to have people like the chair of the trust of the pools involved in the decision-making process for the working group, alongside members, and working with other members that are kind of wider members of the council that aren't on the working group. So yeah, could I have some clarity on how that's going to work moving forward, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you, Councillor Perkin. I think I think it's a really valid point. Clearly, as the report mentions, we've had some initial conversations with the key leisure stakeholders, but absolutely they need to be front and centre in terms of those conversations. What we have to do is give members a space to have a conversation about the whole range of options. So our preference is that we would have it as a member-only working group, but with close connections and regular meetings with those key leisure stakeholders. So we've certainly offered those stakeholders the opportunity for that. I think really and truthfully, whilst the working groups, you mentioned about the pace as well, there are options that allow us to that the working group can have a look at that give us a little bit of flexibility on that date, and so that they will be the first things that the working group would look at. We've got quite a robust set of workshop dates in the diary so that we can meet at pace and go through things. But as I say, I would rather flex that timeline and get it right. So it is a hard deadline on that. We need to have made a decision by that point, but we do feel there is enough time. So on both of your points, time, absolutely, it's tight, but I think let's see where we get after the first few workshops, and then we can come back to the committee and review that. We've given ourselves January and March community committees as an option of when we need to make the final decision. I would rather make a decision by January on the basis it gives longer, as you say, between then and 25. But if it needs to be March on the basis of getting the decision right or looking at more information and of course giving ourselves time to engage with the key stakeholders, then March is possible on that. So that's the current thought process behind the member only working group, given that they need to consider options that might or might not be palatable to any of the three key stakeholders, but that has to be done in close communication with those and regular updates behind the scenes as well.
And I can assure there's quite a few meetings of the working group will be coming up just to get things back for the January meeting. Councillor MacDonald, followed by Councillor Last.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. It's just a very quick question, actually, through my utter and complete ignorance. I noticed there was an increase in the cost to Swale. Is this through energy costs or, that's really the question. I'm not blaming anybody. Things go up, but do we pay for the energy costs of these facilities?
Thank you. There are a number of cost pressures coming out the back of COVID. There was a fairly large National Leisure Relief Fund, if I've got that right, I think, which was a government funded scheme that we then facilitated with each of the partners to support them through that really post-recovery period. The current contractual arrangement with SCL and Serco, which covers Swallows and Sheppey, is referred to as a cap and collar arrangement on utilities. And the way that works it is quite a complicated, believe me, it's a complicated process, but ultimately the operator, the operator is responsible for consumption. So it's in their own interest to have good housekeeping, good management systems in place, coming up with initiatives around reducing carbon footprint and so on. And tariff up to RPI plus 1%. Anything beyond that is Swale Borough Council's commitment to support the operation. And that's worked out on a baseline, so that we've agreed a baseline of a 12-month period for consumption at both of the centres. On gas and electric, it does not cover water. Water is purely at the operator's risk. And then we work from that baseline on a quarterly basis where they submit full full open book invoices that they've received from their energy providers. And then we work that through a modelling system, which gives us a figure at the end that we currently are owing them, sorry. And obviously, if the tariff comes down, then obviously we will benefit from that, whereby we may get to a position where we may not support them at all one quarter because we don't need to. But there is an arrangement.
Through you, Chair, just
Yep, Martin.
to add, so you'll see the Q2 monitoring data go to Policy and Resources Committee in the next at the next meeting, and I'm predicting about £100,000 overspend on utilities at the leisure centres in this financial year. So short answer is yes, very much utilities, but that's not the only thing going up either. You know, maintenance contracts go up, age of facilities. So yeah, unfortunately, having made some good gains when we did the extension of the contract, starting to creep back up again because of rising costs.
Okay. Well, the last speaker to speak, by the looks of it, is Councillor Last.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I think I'm going to be a bit of a fly in the ointment here. It's really a request. Can I be co-opted onto this working party? Because I do represent the council on the Swale Leisure Board. So I will have an insight as to what is needed and what's going on.
I will take advice on that, but I actually see the sense in doing that. Give any advice on that?
I think it's at the chair's discretion on the basis, but we would obviously need to level that up with the Faversham Pools Trust as well, you know, for the effort. So we asked each group leader to nominate. We didn't stipulate it had to be from this committee, so we got those nominations. I, like you, I wouldn't be opposed to those that are representing the council on various boards to be there. However, the monitoring officer did rule that somebody that was sitting within the trust, not on the basis of representing Swale Borough Council, was unable to be on the working group. So, like you, general principle is one of support, but I would want to run it past the monitoring officer before we took that decision.
Is that all right? I think we need to seek the advice of the monitoring officer, and we'll come back. We'll let you know by email, and I think we'll let all members know of the committee what the outcome is. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, okay, so now we move on to the vote, but I'd like first of all to get someone to propose and second the motion. Councillor Jay's proposing, Councillor Nundy seconding. So there's two recommendations. We may as well take them both together. Members are asked to note the contents of the report, which we can easily do, and members to agree the Leisure Options Working Group terms of reference as at Appendix 1. So who's in favour of that recommendations? Both recommendations together. And that's unanimous again. Thank you. Okay, if we move on to agenda item 8, which is the parking policy review, and it's something that this committee set up as a working group of this committee. There's been a lot of engagement both through the area committees, through members' feedback, and hopefully they've recommended a good draft policy. But if I can get the officer, Janet, to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In June this year, the Community Committee agreed that a parking policy member working group be set out to carry out a parking review. The working group have met several times to consider feedback from their political groups, area committees, along with various items of data. They've agreed the proposals which are set out in paragraph 2.8 of the covering report, which will be referred for consideration at the annual fees and charges review. They have also worked with officers to develop a parking policy which pulls together all parking principles and procedures into one document. The report this evening presents the draft parking policy for the Community Committee to consider and comment on before approving it to go out an 8-week public consultation. Members will also find an equality impact assessment included in the agenda pack, which has been carried out for the draft parking policy. Thank you.
Okay, if I can throw it open to members, if they have any questions they would like to ask. Thank you. Councillor Cheeseman first, followed by Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Point on a question I will ask is on the from 7 till 7 for the car parks, and it's a flat rate for £3. But what if somebody comes and I only want 2 hours from 6 till 8? Does the machine know? Will it just pay for 2 hours? It won't sort of pay for an hour and then charge the £3 for the second hour.
Martin, is it?
It's going to be technical questions tonight. So, as the proposal currently stands, it would be that you pay your 1 hour between 6 and 7 at the hourly rate, and then you would pay the evening charge. So you would pay, let's say at the moment it's £1.30, so you would pay your £4.30 for that 2 hours parking. That is the proposal that's being put forward from the working group. That's it.
But I did feel that there was going to be a request made with parking services, just to see if it's possible to, because that could really disadvantage someone who goes in for an hour swim at 7 o'clock and has to pay £3. Whereas normally they would pay £1.20. I was under the impression that parking services said it's possible with Ringo, but they were going to check to see if it's possible with machines. Do we know if it's possible that it can differentiate, that someone can say, I'm only paying for 2 hours from 6 till 8, or I just want 1 hour from 7 till 8. That otherwise there could be a disadvantage in the system. That's what I think members might be worried about.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The working group considered a range of data that and came to that decision. It was only it was a consequence that could we go off and look at the possibility of doing both. What I would say is that's and the difficulty is we've included it in the report, so it's absolutely right that you question that tonight. But my key thing will be that will be something that needs to be teased out both in the consultation and in the fees and charges process, because we're not here to agree fees and charges tonight. We're here to agree whether the policy, so the policy wording does not refer to the 7 till 7 and the fixed fee. The policy gives us the ability through fees and charges to make those changes. So absolutely, we will go away and look at that request because it was made at the end of the last parking policy working group, but that wasn't a decision that the policy working group came to. It was to put forward that. So So absolutely, we can look at it. What will need to happen is that the working group will have to revisit the data, because that potentially has financial implications for consideration as well. So whereas I feel the working group had that data to make the decisions that they made, they similarly need to have the income data to be able to change that decision that they make.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and it is a good point, well made, that the fees and charges are decided by P&R and at full council. So, you know, this is just a policy going forward. But that's a very good question. Thank you. If we go over now, I've got Councillor Winkler, Councillor Last, and Councillor Nundy at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some reservations about bringing charges in where we've got existing free charges at car parks. I did mention this at the policy review meeting. One being the Country Park in Milton, and I've also been made aware that I believe the Gunpowder Works car park is free down at Faversham, if I've been told correctly. So I do have some concerns over that. I know it's going to come back before the parking policy review, but any idea if we was to charge at the country parks and etc., what charge we would be looking at?
I don't personally know. Again, that would be decided by fees and charges, and I appreciate you're raising a very good point for your constituents or your residents in your ward. I don't know if Martin can add anything to that.
I'm going to sound like a bit of a broken record, because everyone, whenever we talk about parking, wants to talk about charges. This report and this policy is not in essence talking about. I could say a number to you, Councillor Winkler, and I could say it will be £1 an hour or it will be £10 an hour, and you've quite rightly said that you disagree with charging for the car parks that are free car parks at the moment. That would be something that needs to be debated with the right facts in front of you, and that is through the fees and charges process at P&R and then full council in February.
Okay, thanks for your answer.
Councillor Last.
Sorry to sound like a broken record, but you may not have this information, but I would like to have something back in writing. How much money would the council charge by introducing this £3 charge? How much would we make or get if we don't change the policy? And thirdly, what's the impact likely to be on the nighttime economy? So it's just by saying we want to move to £3, have we really looked at what we're trying to raise here in terms of fees? And secondly, will it have an impact on Sittingbourne on the island with nighttime economy? You may not have those answers, and I'm quite happy for you to come back to me on that. The second bit I would like to say is there's a reference to coach parking in here. And I think it would be a very good idea if we looked at spaces for coach parking, certainly on the island, certainly with Sheerness and Laysdown, and certainly with Faversham, just to encourage tourism. There's less space in Sittingbourne, but I think if we looked at having a strategy towards coach parking, we've got a couple of sites where certainly on the island and certainly in Faversham would be of use for the whole economy as well.
To answer the first one, yes, we are looking at coach park, but I'll let Martin come back on that. And again, I'll echo what Martin says. The argument will be at the fees and charges, but the figures are quite substantial if you drop below the £3. I can't remember them off my head. Whereas if you did the £3, it's about breaking even point to how it is this year. Does the fees and charges affect the nighttime economy? I don't think so. I think what really is affecting nighttime economy is the cost of living crisis for people. That's the big You know, I think there are people who can afford to go out, and if they're going to go out into the town, they're going to see a film, and they're going to then go out and have a meal. They're paying for the parking isn't going to be their biggest impact, but there are a lot of people who can't afford to go out or take their children into the town to do the bowling or to see a film because of the cost of living crisis, and that is what I think is having a major impact. But I will come back to Martin as well, because he might be able to clarify some of the points that I've tried to cover.
Thank you. So income with the new proposal versus income with not changing is absolutely data that the working group saw. So they saw the times of the day that and what income was received in that period. They saw what different tariffs would do. So continue at the moment, obviously we have an hourly tariff up till midnight, and they saw the income that would be lost if they removed the evening charging. So we went right back to, if we went back to 6 p.m. final charge, this is the likely impact on the council's finances. So absolutely that data is available, and the working group saw that, hence coming to the decisions that they made. And as I say, these are the decisions on proposals as opposed to decisions. I'm talking when you hear the word decision, it's as though it's a fait accompli. It's not. It's that would be put forward for discussion by the full council, obviously as part of the fees and charges process. So what I can say is that the evening charging, the evening charge tariff would benefit some customers, and as clearly has been raised earlier, may not benefit others. And so there's always a balancing act. So if you were going out for the evening, doing your meal and cinema or concert or in the pub or wherever, then generally you're better off if you're staying for that longer period. But if you're shorter at the moment, as the proposal stands, then there is a disadvantage there. Impact on the nighttime economy. I'm going to play the card that is I'm a parking officer. I can't predict what is or isn't happening in the nighttime economy. I'm not aware that there is anywhere there where that data would be held of whether something was, whether a industry was struggling because of parking charges or not. As Councillor Palmer says, there are a whole raft of other measures that would contribute to that impact. Coach parking, for those of you, because I think you're all new on the community committee, apart from Councillor Jays and Councillor Palmer, the previous and Councillor Winklis, the previous community committee agreed a proposal to do some coach parking at Minster Leys, just opposite Barton's Point, to try and convert one of the grassed areas there into a coach parking area. So it sits as a potential project in the council's list for the future. So we've done quite a lot of looking at coach parking in Faversham and Sittingbourne. And it's safe to say they all provide challenges at the moment. If there was an easy option, I think we would have taken it. But that doesn't mean that the point of putting it in the policy says, let's not give up trying to find those solutions.
Thank you for that. Councillor Nundy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive and it does cover quite a few points. Just a couple of bits that come up at the Sheppey Area Committee. It was about volunteers. So one of my concerns would be that there are residents, particularly, I can only talk for the Isle of Sheppey because that's where I live, but that run community groups that don't charge, and community radio stations that operate on a volunteer basis, and they're now out of pocket trying to provide the community, essentially trying to provide the community with a sensible service. I understand if people are making a profit out of it, that is a little bit different, because anyone that was working in town would have to pay to use one of the council-run car parks there, and we're obviously not going to change that. But could some sort of dispensation be made within the policy for volunteers, pass or something like that? I do have one other question as well. It's about the body-worn cameras. So I'm really pleased that the parking officers are using them, because they are very good at capturing abuse, and I would imagine that people giving out parking tickets probably get quite a lot. But it says in the policy that cameras are also used to investigate complaints made by members of the public, providing an impartial third witness. However, footage cannot be used as supporting evidence when challenging a PCN. But surely the best evidence that you'd have would be that body-worn video camera footage, because it would be pointing directly at the car. And if someone was saying that they were parked within the lines, but the body-worn camera footage would show that, and that seems quite strange that people aren't allowed to use that as supporting evidence.
Very good questions. One of them I won't answer, but passers, it has been discussed. It was discussed and looked at. The trouble is, the cost of issuing a pass could possibly outweigh any fees and charges. Define a volunteer. Where do you finish with volunteering? Because I look after my elderly grandmother and I go into town, I'm a volunteer carer. Once you start going down that line, it can be a very awkward one. It's to look at the policy, but it is a good question, because I think a lot of members have asked that question, but I think it's a very hard question to answer, to actually who is a volunteer, and do you just issue a pass for the Monday night that they do, and then if they happen to go in on Tuesday night for a bit of extra, does that cause a problem? So there's lots of problems and issues. But on the body-worn camera, I haven't got a clue, so I'm going to defer to Martin, who hopefully will be able to answer the question, or at least come back with an answer at some stage. Thank you.
He's going to say he hasn't got a clue as well, Councillor Palmer, unfortunately. I will take that question away and ask. I think what this is probably badly trying to say is that it's not for members of the public to be able to access the footage to support their claim, but I don't think that precludes us from using that to show that it's clearly the case if it went to appeal. So I will just clarify that, because I don't know that 100%. But what that's trying to do is not have everybody trying to access body-worn camera footage for every appeal, because it ties a lot of administration up. It's not data that's easily accessible, and so I think that's why it's there, as opposed to not being able to be used in an appeal. It's that it's not for people just to be able to request and use that.
Thank you for that. I'm also slightly concerned. It says that the cameras record for a full shift. Well, I know that in many other areas where people wear body-worn video cameras, they don't record permanently, and I'm concerned that that could be a breach of someone's privacy if they are recording the whole time that someone's on shift. Or is it a case that the parking officers turn it on if they're approached by a member of the public, or if they're going to issue a PCN?
It does record the whole shift, because unlike others where they're able to turn it on and off, a lot of the reason we have it running is because a lot of it is unexpected. So I'll give an example only this week, where a CEO was approached with a weapon, completely out of the blue, and we've got it fully on camera. And had that not been the case that they were recording, it's very unlikely they would have been able to have got to that in order to enact it and catch the act in place. So it's very much for, unfortunately, and Councillor Palmer and Jays will tell you they see stats every month. not only is it getting worse, it's getting more severe, worse in terms of numbers of incidents. It's getting worse in severity as well. And that is an example just this week, one of our employees, being approached in that way. So from our point of view, this is an absolute must. And actually, we believe the safety of the officer, that outweighs the negatives in that way. What is not done is that if the shift passes without problem, none of that is downloaded, it's not stored or anything. So in terms of breaching people's data protection, then absolutely not. They're very clearly warned as well. So it's not like we're doing it covertly. So therefore, on that basis, we're comfortable, and it's been through our data governance processes and various other things in terms of that.
Well, thank you very much. Cheers.
Okay, looks like nobody else has a question, so we can move on to. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cheeseman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's about the on-street parking, where the residents' parking bays. Just got a question. If a new build comes along into a road or an HMO, they're obviously not given, they're not allowed permits. But an existing house where they probably had, say, 2 permits, but then that existing house is turned into an HMO, they're not allowed any permits. Why is that?
Oh, yes. So there was a policy passed, which is often referred to as Part K, which basically said to avoid the situation where a property is knocked down and lots of flats are built, for instance, and then what that would do is flood the resident parking zone with additional permits. We know that we're already at capacity in a number of the resident parking zones as it is. So that policy was passed on the basis of trying to design out that problem. The policy does say that if there is any change in use or change in development of a property, then that precludes them from being within the zone. You are correct. There's the odd nuance to that, but really and truthfully, it's there to. It was passed a number of years ago and has worked effectively throughout in terms of that policy.
Anybody else? No. Sorry, Councillor Perkin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say thank you to the officers, because there's been a lot of work that's been done by the focus group. Well, that's not the right word for it. I've gone corporate. Sorry, the working group. Just in terms of really diving into the data, like Councillor last picked up, that there's been lots of looking at the kind of payoffs from one thing to another, and also we're in a position that actually, in terms of financing car parking, is one of our main income streams, and if we were to look at losing money on car parking, then that is going to impact on core services, or it's going to impact on potentially our grant funding for charities and things like that. So I think there's that in terms of kind of a cost of living situation, there's a balance between this being an income for the council and that offsetting some of the work that we do with external partners and core services. So yeah, just to thank the officers for the amount of information that was given, and also I think the communication with members who weren't on the working group, especially around the area committees. I would say though, I was disappointed with the amount of people that came to the area committee in Faversham, because it was one of the probably top things that was spoken about for the months leading up to the area committee, and then we really didn't have any members of the public come and feed into it, so that was quite difficult. So I'm glad that it's going to go out to public consultation. I think obviously all of us as councillors have got a responsibility to make sure as many people know about it and feed into the consultation as possible. So yeah, thanks.
No, thank you. Very good points made. And yes, Janet and her team did a very good job. and there was good engagement and good feedback from the area committees as well. So if no one else has any questions, we'll move straight to the vote. Again, I need someone to propose the recommendation and someone to second it. So I've got Councillor Last and Councillor Shield, wasn't it? Thank you. Councillor Last proposing, Councillor Shield seconding. So if we can move on to the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation, discuss and approve the draft parking policy to go out to public consultation. That's unanimous again. And I think Councillor Perkin raised a good point. It is up to us as members to make sure that all our residents know about this and to try and have an input as much as possible. Thank you. I think that brings us now just to the forward plan, agenda item 9. And as you can see, if you've all looked at it, when things are coming back, such as the Leisure Working Options Group, the Community Safety Partnership setting priorities, and the built facilities and plain pitch strategy coming back in March. Anyone got any questions or anything on the agenda item 9, the board decision plan? Thank you. Councillor Perkin.
I know I raised this last time, but could we just keep an eye on the workings of the youth and family hub consultation at KCC, because it's been a really odd consultation in that they did a consultation about closing the children's centres, and then they did another consultation which was related to it but didn't have that in there anymore. So really not sure what's going on with it, but it's got its potential to have quite a massive impact on the community in Swale. So I think we really need to just keep an eye on it. And if it comes back at any point, potentially add it to an agenda for discussion at some stage. Thank you.
Councillor Worcester.
Sorry, Chair, I know it's unusual to comment on future planning for a committee when it's not my committee. I just wanted to ask, because I don't follow your committee as regularly as I should, I apologise about that, and being a new councillor, I would just like to know, we've got your parking consultation going at the moment. When is it likely that we can have an update as to how the public engagement is going for that? Shall I speak to, for instance, Councillor Nundy, who's another fellow Island councillor, or maybe my Labour group representative, about asking for figures so that we can encourage more response for you on local level, or is that enough? I don't know. Thank you.
How do you mean? What, you want more information on the parking policy strategy, figures and all that? I think if you speak to your own group, they should have things that they might be able to provide you that was provided to them as part of the working group. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Do apologise. Sorry about that.
If it's a query about how responses are going for the public consultation that will be commencing most likely tomorrow, then we'll be keeping a record of the number of responses, and then we will do like a second launch part way through, just to remind people. So I should have figures as we're going as to how many responses we're getting, if that will be useful for any members.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Apologies.
Anybody else got anything on the forward plan? So with that to be, I will close the meeting at 20:34. Thank you, everyone.